This Hangout on Air is live. Uh-oh. We're going head-to-head with some Olympic swimming, so I understand if you're not paying that much attention to me, to us. Sigmund Bloom here. Cecil Lammy's on assignment. And I've got with us tonight Mr. Matt Waldman. Matt, I can tell from your tweets that you've been watching some preseason football. Tell us initial impressions, first night of football of this season.
I was just disappointed that Bob's Discount Furniture was giving the James White commentary rather than Matt Harmon through the NFL affiliate feed. But other than that, I mean, Mike Thomas making sweet catches like that. Brendan Wild, while he fumbled a ball, actually looked pretty darn good through it. Garoppolo, a little up and down, I would have to say, probably a little more down than up. But I mean, there's certainly been some nice things to see it just in flashes. But again, it's just one layer. We've got another 4 weeks of training camp and games ahead. So I'm not getting too excited about anything that I'm seeing at this stage.
It's just week one, but there'll be the needle moving on a few things. Dr. Gene, do you feel more needed, more wanted now that things are happening seemingly every day that we all think immediately? Do you feel us send out that vibe, like, I need to know what Dr. Gene would say about this? Are you happy to be back in our hearts and our minds?
No, I don't want anybody getting hurt. I would just as soon be talking about people that are coming back rather than elbow dislocations and headaches out of nowhere and all that sort of stuff.
No, it's true. It's true.
I don't have a need to be needed. We can talk about that on the couch.
Well, yeah, listen, there's a lot there, but I agree with you, and I like the way that you couch that. Speaking of couching, that we don't ever want to see anyone get hurt. Anytime we hear someone got hurt, no matter what, it's good, bad, whatever for our fantasy teams, especially in training camp, you don't want to hear that. And Matt Harmon, NFL.com, with the gold medal hair game tonight. Welcome back, Matt Harmon, and Matt Harmon making waves. And this is going to be the second time this week, Matt, that I'm going to talk about your article on our show. So this guy is registering on the Richter scale. And welcome back, and please, Harmon, don't hurt us.
Oh, no. Hey, man, it's good to be here. There's literally football on the television, which is pretty exciting, even though it's, preseason football. Listen, if you don't like preseason football, you don't really like football. So get out of here. Get off. Don't at me if you don't like preseason football. But no, it's good to be here, man. Good to be talking.
It is, and I was on a show earlier this week where they were asking, like, is there anything to be learned from the preseason? Is there anything to be learned from the preseason? We can just start with rookies. Before we do that, I'm going to start with a word from our sponsor, FanDuel.com. Building the team is easy. You pick your players, stay under the cap, sit back, watch your team win. Entry fee start at just $1. If you know fantasy, come and prove it at FanDuel.com. With the code FBGPOD, new users will get a free Football Guys Insider Pro subscription with a $10 deposit. You click on that microphone, enter FBG Pod, you get the free subscription, you get the $10 to get things going at FanDuel, and of course all the great help you're going to get at footballguys.com to help you win. If you already have a subscription, you get another year added on. FanDuel.com every week is a new week, and this is a new week, new season. FanDuel.com. Use the code FBGPod. Claim that free Football Guys Insider Pro subscription if you're a new FanDuel user. Today, we've got some stuff to sort out. We've got some news going on here, and as we have the big. I'm sorry if I'm a bit distracted with the Olympics individual medley, but always on top of things, Dr. Gene. Yeah. Let's start with the Malcolm Mitchell. We're going to go rounds here. It'll be me, and then Waldman, and then Harmon, as we pepper Dr. Gene with questions in the lightning round. Malcolm Mitchell, you saw the injury, and this seems like something that elbows aren't supposed to bend that way, Doc. When you saw that, what are we talking about here? Weeks, months, season? What do we think?
Well, I think it could be any of those things. I don't think it's likely to be season ending, but it could be. It really depends on. So I think what we're looking at there is an elbow dislocation. Could certainly be more than that. I don't think it's going to be any less. Elbow dislocations, by definition, mean that there are torn ligaments involved, and those ligaments take a while to heal. But usually, with a little bit of support, players can return somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks. We saw Danny Amendola for the Patriots do that. J.J. Watt came back pretty quickly. Lots and lots of NFL players have returned in kind of that 3 to 4 week range, sometimes a little bit longer. But the key is going to be, are there any broken bones around the joint? And nothing huge, but even little small chip fractures can be a problem. Muscles can be torn. Tyler Eifert's season was ended 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember which. I think 3 years ago now, because one of his muscles was pretty much torn in two, and it wasn't something that could have been sewed back together. It needed to be allowed to rehab it slowly, and it was a matter of months. So I would expect that Mitchell's probably already had the elbow put back in place. He's already had an X-ray done. The Patriots have already tweeted out that it was an elbow injury. Hopefully there's no other injuries, and we'll hear tomorrow pretty good news. And if that's the case, we're far enough in advance of the regular season that you'd expect, you'd certainly like a guy like Mitchell to get as many reps in, and positive reps like he was getting tonight, as many as he could. But hopefully this won't set him back too far this season, and we'll see him back relatively early if he misses any time at all.
Mr. Waldman.
I'm sorry, I was watching Nate Sudfeld roll out here and look nimbler than he did at Indiana in probably quite some time. Jadeveon Clowney, he's not playing. He's got some knee soreness. Can you talk about, maybe how that knee soreness has to do with maybe some after effects of the recent surgeries that he's had over the years?
Yeah, I don't think we're sure exactly what's going on. I caught that today too, that it's been 5 or 6 days that he's not been at practice, and there were a number of days earlier in training camp where he seemed to be fine. There was nothing but positivity about his microfracture surgery earlier this year. So the hope was, especially since he started, he got back to training camp so quickly, that he'd be fine. The Texans really haven't given us any additional information about it. There was a little bit of a hint that suggested that he'd be able to practice next week, but it could be a week or so more. So we don't even know if it's the same knee. We don't know if it's related to the surgery. It's really hard to say what's going on, but hopefully they get him back quickly.
Yeah, Gene, so I guess it's my turn here. Alshon Jeffrey returned to practice on Monday from the hamstring. I'm sure we probably covered him on the show before, but the hamstring thing is starting to become a recurring issue. Is this something that we're just going to probably have to deal with for potentially the rest of his career, popping this hamstring coming up again and again, or is it something maybe we can let slip again?
I think the longer it goes, the less likely we have to worry about it. We've seen wide receivers like Andre Johnson and others have hamstring injuries in a spot where that there's scarring, or it's near a tendon, or it's something that's going to be likely to be a recurrent problem in the future. We don't know that until it actually happens, or until the receiver or one of the coaches drops a little bit of nugget of information that tells us that that's the case. All we know about Jeffrey is that he's had at least one hamstring injury to that same side, and one that took a while to recover from. Without knowing specifically where this injury was or how related it was to stuff he's had on the past, it's tough to answer that question. But it was definitely a good sign that this one truly did turn into a day-to-day situation, and they were so comfortable with him that they not only let him come to practice this week, but he participated in at least one series tonight and looked okay doing so. And we've seen Jeffrey fight through these injuries before, so the fact that he was able to come back so quickly hopefully means that it was just truly one of those cases where it was absolutely a tweak.
All right, Gene, we get to another dismaying piece of news from today about Ladarius Green. And he had 2 concussions in 11 days last year. Now, this year, the word is it's not the ankle. And we did get that piece of news about plates, and what that indicated, I think Will Carroll was saying, stress fracture. But it's not the stress fracture. It's not the recovery that keeps him working off on the side. Maybe, but you can tell us whether this all jives, because my initial thought was, well, if he still having recurring headaches, why is he working at all until those symptoms go away? But now Mike Florio adding on top of that there's a chance he could be forced to retire, or he could retire, or the Steelers could release him and try to regain some of his signing bonus. Assuming, we do have a report, I believe, from his agent that it's headaches. So we're talking, almost a year past those 2 concussions in short succession. Let's try to give us something positive about this.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird situation. I think it makes sense, as it did for Jordy Nelson, that there was something more going on, whether it be related to the ankle or whether it be something totally unrelated, for why, they signed him in March not thinking there was going to be an issue. He wasn't non-weight bearing during OTAs. There was every expectation that he was going to participate early in camp. So it kind of came out of nowhere that we're going on 2 weeks now with him still on the PUP list and seemingly not ready to return. This sort of came out of nowhere today as well, with it being headache related, and he's not had any contact for months. So, with the headaches there, with the multiple concussions last year, the implication from both of the NFL Network folks, including Ian Rappaport today, was that the reason, they're concerned about the headaches is they're not ready to clear him for contact yet. That's the implication. No one came right out and said that, but if that's the case, it feels a lot like Javid Best a couple of years ago, where why are we still having symptoms that we're concerned to be related to concussion or would prevent him from getting clearance for contact so many months later? If those symptoms are of concern, Ladarius Green, back in March, I think there was an interview with Mark Caboli that was posted today where he said it was just sinuses. It wasn't even a concussion.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going on here? I think it's really premature for whatever's going on in Pro Football Talk to say, well, he's going to retire or he may be released with an injury settlement, and reading into the comments that Ben Roethlisberger didn't even bring up his name when they were talking about the tight end situation and how frustrated Pittsburgh was with that. And, it sounds like there's been rumors of this for a while, at least floating around, and no one was able to confirm them until the agent did so today. But you feel like there's something going on here, but I would imagine that it's just as easy to see Green come back in a week to 10 days and be cleared and be fine as it is at this point that he's not ready to come back. Because it just seems odd that we're talking 8+ months later that there are headaches that are limiting his return. So I think you can read between the lines and see why maybe Mike Tomlin and Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers might be frustrated with this situation since they signed him thinking that he was going to be a replacement for Heath Miller way back in March. But I just think there's not enough information here to know for sure. But the more we hear about the headaches and the more this gets confirmed, if that's the reason he's on PUP list, then it's a huge concern.
So really quick, just one. I just want to follow up. Would we draw any link between the 2 concussions in 11 days and this? I mean, is this something? I'm just looking for the future. If we see a player get 2 concussions in quick succession, is this something that gets our antenna up?
It should always get our antenna up when you have a concussion where the symptoms don't resolve very quickly, and I'm like within 48 hours, where a player has a chance to play the following week, or at least is allowed to practice the week after the missed game and gets back with only 1 missed game. I think the longer the symptoms go, the more concerned you get about recovery period at any time. And then if you have more than 1 concussion, especially more than 1 concussion that takes you out for longer than a week within the same season, I think you have to be worried about it. But the standard response I have to this is the expectation is if you allow a concussion to fully heal, and yes, that depends a little bit on self-reporting by the player, that those players should be deemed healthy enough to return, and not necessarily every player being at high risk of a future concussion. Now, we don't know anatomy, we don't know physiology of the brain, all this. Some players are definitely going to be more susceptible to multiple concussions, but the idea is, why would you let a player go back to play if you felt like he was at risk of a concussion at any point in the future and a more severe one? Or let's not say more severe, let's say one where the symptoms take longer to resolve. So I think, yes, if it gets confirmed by Mike Tomlin or the team that the reason he was held out was because of recurrent headaches, and he comes back and he gets another concussion this year, it is almost certainly going to be a long absence.
So, Gene, is there any evidence that maybe, I don't know, Kevin Colbert suffered a concussion actually, and this is evidence of that, him actually signing Ladarius Green in the first place? Don't answer that question.
There's a report, by the way, that he didn't tell them. There's been reports later on today that he did not tell them officially, not that that's whatever that's worth.
And if that's accurate, if at the time of him signing his free agent deal in March he was having headaches, and he's still having headaches now in early August, it's absolutely a Javid Best situation, although I have no idea why we're throwing this sinus business into the mix that Green did as well. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if that is the true timeline, where he's having quote-unquote sinus headaches, he was having them in March, he's having them now, nothing is fully resolved, then you could easily see a situation where he doesn't get cleared to play this year. But there's really just not enough information out there to say that with any sort of certainty.
Yeah, so maybe that's what the Chargers told him to say. Maybe he's still repeating the party line of what the Chargers told him to say, is that he has sinus issues, and he forgot to get the memo in Pittsburgh that you actually have to tell the truth. So Julian Edelman, speaking of teams that are so truthful about their injury situations, he's returned to practice. Seems to be just a scare, but seems to me too, when you throw your helmet in frustration and you're worried about something, he must have felt something pretty scary there in his foot. How worried are you that this scare isn't just a sinus problem in his foot?
Well, if he returned and he was cleared to come back the very following day and hasn't had issues since then, you can get scar tissue in and around surgical sites. That's a pretty common thing. If he took a funny step and had a little bit of a tweak there, you could see how a player who missed multiple weeks last year needed a revision surgery in May, and then within a week of coming off the pup list after sprinting up and down hills and being ready to come back has a short problem, how frustrated you would be if you felt like there was an issue there. But hopefully it was nothing more than just popping through a little bit of scar tissue, and it doesn't get any more reassuring than returning to practice within 24 hours.
Pretty dang frustrating. That's how I'd feel.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. That was a bold choice to pour that drink right in the middle of the session here. So, Gene, we knew that Amari Cooper had some sort of foot injury last year, but I guess this week, Rappaport, who I saw get a sandwich today in the lunchroom.
What kind of sandwich?
I don't care that much.
Sources.
I'm not one of the lunchroom insiders. I'm mostly just there to get my sad salad and get out.
Mayonnaise.
But so apparently he said that Cooper actually played through plantar fasciitis for most of last year, which I thought was pretty shocking because I went back and charted his reception perception, and it came out pretty good. So is this something we can expect to really change his game now that he's not suffering through this?
Yeah, I think I was hoping that somebody would tell us what the foot issue was. Cooper said earlier this week or late last week that it was a foot thing that really bothered him all through the year, and I didn't know if we were ever going to get any information, whether it was plantar fasciitis or something different. We saw how this affected Antonio Gates a couple of years ago. We saw how this was affecting Drew Brees last year, where he really wasn't mobile in the pocket and changing directions as well as he had in the past. So, yeah, I buy even that. I think, if his perception numbers were that good, that there's still more to come. And I think early in the season last year we saw him doing really well. And so it's an explosive issue, it's a change of direction issue, it's a chronic pain issue, it's an inability to practice and continue to build rapport with David Carr, roommates notwithstanding. All of those things could have been affected last year, and if he was still good enough and savvy enough to find ways to get open and run his routes well, we knew he was a good route runner from the beginning, that there's only sky's the limit for him this year if that's the case. I don't know that we need to worry about it being a recurrent thing. Plantar fasciitis can definitely be a recurrent issue, but if given time to cool down and calm down a little bit, and that takes months, which he had this off season, hopefully it's something that's behind him and he doesn't have a lot of scarring that's likely to recur. So see how the first couple of weeks of the season goes, and I think we'll have a good indication of how successful he's going to be this year.
Gene, I had a raging case of gout in my big toe a couple weeks ago, and I know fructose is bad. Should I be avoiding all of those candies with high fructose corn syrup? Because I really like them. All right. Let's get back on track here.
You're making me think back to my biochemistry to figure out how the fructose is being converted to uric acid there. I'm not sure I see an easy biochemical pathway to that, but you do.
Be okay. We'll be okay. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, and we're going to continue to have a lot of stuff to talk about. We're so lucky to have Dr. Gene in our corner, even though we rib him sometimes, just because we've got all these players still coming back from injury. We still have some ACL, Lewis, Charles. We still want to see Jordy Nelson back out there, Josh Doxson, Eric Ebron and his mysterious ankle injury. DeAndre Levy, that's what's one on the defensive side, another mystery. And as we have Dr. Gene in the mystery machine with us to help solve these mysteries, and we're lucky to have Matt Harmon here tonight, and we're going to start with a Matt Harmon article, a Matt Harmon jam. It was excellent, and the subject is Todd Gurley, and the idea is Todd Gurley as an early first-round pick, early Gurley in the top 5 of the first round even. Gurley is running back 1. And Matt, because I've been paraphrasing and kind of speaking for you, I want you to take the floor and make the case, and people check this article out at NFL.com, of why Gurley should not be in the consideration in the top 5, not in consideration with a premium first-round pick.
Yeah, so this weekend, I'm sitting around my apartment on Saturday thinking about football, which just should tell you the direction of my life currently. And I just, it just dawned on me that I'm not in. I was really kind of shying away from Gurley as a top 5 pick, just with the idea that I don't want to take a running back, which is probably the most opportunity-driven position in fantasy football, who's specifically attached to a slow and bad offense, and also a quarterback who we don't really know what's going on there right now, other than Goff is not playing well in training camp. Bucky Brooks reported from there that he was almost shocked at how bad Goff, or how unprepared Goff looks to start. So I just don't really want any part of a running back that way, but I kind of, wanted to go back and look and see if there was any proof that running backs needed to be attached to this sort of a situation where they have good quarterback play, where they play in a good offense. And if you just go back since 2009, and then when you even adjust from 2012 to now, it's just very apparent that these running backs need certain things to be successful. And I think the one trump card that a lot of these guys had, like Matt Forte, who played with Jay Cutler when he wasn't playing well, was a really big passing role game. And that's not something that Gurley had as a rookie either. And because they brought back Benny Cunningham, who was one of the leaders in third down snaps among running backs, I don't think it's something that you can just pencil in that Gurley's going to have more of a passing game role. I mean, he might. That's certainly possible. And so, again, I just think a lot of the factors from just a baseline standard, that he doesn't really have the things that you want in a top-tier running back, a number 1 overall pick, much less just the running back 1 overall. I don't think that adds up for him, other than the fact that he's really freaking good, and I get that, but you also don't get extra fantasy points for being really freaking good. You get it by accumulating production, and I don't know that he has the other factors to go along with his talent to rack up that production. And with so many star-studded wide receivers up top, with David Johnson, who I think is a great talent as well, and also attached to everything that you need to be a good fantasy running back, I just don't see the logic in taking him in the top 5. If you want to take him in the back half of the first round, I get it. And this might all look stupid in the end, but really what I wanted to do is just to get people thinking about this from a different perspective, and I think I at least accomplished that.
Oh, definitely. Matt Waldman, you think about this, and you tell me, is Todd Gurley your running back 1? And if someone said, Matt, I'm going to take him in the top 5, would you say, don't do it? Or would you say, hey, I understand why?
I'd say, hey, I understand why you take him in the top 5. Obviously there's a bit of projection that goes into what you're doing, and if you're going to use last year's stats, you can use that as projection, or you can also use the skills of the player and look at that player's growth from one year to the next. And so I would probably say, from that standpoint, Benny Cunningham isn't Chris Johnson. He isn't Andre Ellington. He isn't those two players on the depth chart who are actually going to be splitting more time with David Johnson. When I was telling people back in June to be careful about David Johnson as a top 5 pick because of the fact that the team does like Chris Johnson enough that he may end up getting a split in carries, and as ridiculous as that sounded, we're still hearing that drum beat, and it's been beating fairly steady as much as they like David Johnson on that role. Now with when you look at Todd Gurley, Matt's point, which obviously he lays out a really great argument, and then even lays out a nice counter argument by saying, again, he's really freaking good. Kind of like Adrian Peterson was really freaking good behind an offensive line that stunk and hurt all last year, that was allowing pressure to Teddy Bridgewater on a level that was higher than anybody that any quarterback dealt with last year, and he was still pretty freaking good, like top 5 pick good. In fact, he's my number 1 this year at this stage, and I'm unapologetic about it because I think that offensive line's going to be better. They're going to have better blocking at the second level. So Gurley's actually my number 2. And the reason that I like Gurley in that range is, again, I think that he's the type of player who's clearly shown that, yeah, you maybe production opportunities are things that you need to be that top 5 guy and to be a safe one. So I would agree with Matt that he's not the safest top 1, number 1 overall pick. Totally agree with that. He's not the safest guy there. But as a top 5 pick, I would say when you're pretty freaking good, that usually means you're going to get the ball enough. and you're also able to and when you've proven that because you're pretty freaking good that you can make a pretty freaking bad offensive line look better and produce at the rate that he did with the lower number of carries, I think he's going to eat into Benny Cunningham's targets. I think and that may put him in the range of about 40, 45 targets. That's not unbelievable. It's not Matt Forte level, but at the same time, I think you're also looking at probably 250 attempts, and maybe even a little bit more than that. So when you look at the fact that the Rams didn't actually, they had like 3 games where they lost by more than, I think, lost by more than 14 points in games. And when you look at what Gurley's production was in the draft, the data dominator, he was still, like, I believe, a top 5 producer at his position when it came to, playing from behind and playing in situations where they either up by 7 or they were down by 14. So to me, I'm still rolling with talent in this range, but I understand Matt's argument, and I think it's a good one that provokes good food for thought.
Yeah, it is good food for thought, because really what we have here as a basic proposition is Todd Gurley was swimming upstream last year, and he was still among the best. So we have a 1-year sample in this offense. And some of the things that I brought up, and of course I'm pro Gurley because I want to sing hurly Gurley, hurly Gurley, hurly. I want to sing that as often as I can this year, and I think that Rob Boris, when he took over,
some vodka. Right.
Yeah, welcome back, man.
I wish this was.
pour the drink. No, and I think that the proposition is, can he do that again? Is he that special of a talent? And there is some wiggle room for the situation to get a little bit better, but it'll still be among the league's worst with Case Keenum. But, Gene, I'm going to ask you something that's more hard data up your alley. I believe his ACL tear was November 25th. 2014. So he returned last year about 10 months removed. Is it fair to say that there is more room for him to get better from what we saw from last year, not including how he'd get better because his body's maturing because he's getting older, or now is ACL surgery recovery advanced enough that we say, no, when you see the guy come back the year after, there's not extra room for him to get better? Is it fair to say more than a year removed, or even something as simple as a full NFL offseason to work out as opposed to rehab the knee? Is that something that would enhance his possibilities this year, or am I trying too hard to make my case?
No, I don't think you are. And I think there's 5 guys in the discussion: Gurley, Johnson, Peterson, Elliott, and Bell. I think we can nitpick a little something about each one of those 5 guys, and not to denigrate nitpicking necessarily, because I think it's worth doing when you're talking about players up in that range. But I think that's kind of what we're doing here. I think we all agree that they're good players, and we all agree that they should have good seasons. And we're talking about just how high their ceiling may be versus what their floor may be. No, and I think you hit on it there at the end. I think his ability to take physical reps and not just mental reps to build his body into even more of an NFL body than what it was. All of those things this offseason is key, whether or not he had an ACL injury. But I think it can only help. I think we are far enough removed now with the new rehab techniques where the range of motion starts immediately after surgery, where we don't worry quite as much about the proprioception, which is when the ligament has to revascularize and then start telling the brain where the knee joint is in space. That's what that means. And we used to think, I think that that it used to be an understanding that would be a 12 to 18 month process. I always reference Wes Welker when we talk about this, who said he didn't feel right for a year or so afterwards. We used to hear that frequently. I don't think we hear that nearly as much, and I think it's because of the acceleration in range of motion and the accelerated rehab. But there still is something to that. The ligament is probably fully healed, but the mental aspect and everything that goes along with that probably isn't fully back until these guys have had a number of games under their belt and then another full off season. So yeah, from a health standpoint, I think there is some more left in Gurley's tank to recover.
Okay, tonight we have some games going on, and there was a rookie wide receiver. We led with Malcolm Mitchell, who was playing really well and has probably a dislocated elbow. But there's another. I know. Well, it was funny too because I saw the flurry of tweets on my timeline. and then the next flurry of tweets on my timeline about Malcolm Mitchell. Actually, before I do this transition, let me jump in and give you a word from our other sponsor tonight. It's pour a drink. This is Football Guy. When I say a word from our sponsor, pour a drink. That's the Thursday night Audible game. Football Guys Players Championship. Drafts are going to be going through September 8th. $250,000 grand prize, over $1.8 million in total prizes, and championship round prizes down to $650 a place. League prizes $1,500 for first place, $500 for second. Capped at 6,900 teams. All prizes guaranteed, escrowed for the ultimate prize protection. And only $350 to enter. $1,000 will get you 3 teams. That $50 off of that third team. If you're nervous about drafting early, well, first of all, you can see preseason information coming in. We're going to talk about some of these ways that you can lose an edge if you have the idea about a player before other people, and then preseason happens. Don't be worried, because there are 2 preseason free agency runs scheduled on September 2nd and 7th. So if some things happen, intervening events, and you need to make some changes before week 1, you could do that in the Football Guys Players Championship. So another rookie tonight having the performance, and really just the steady drumbeat. I led saying on another podcast, they asked me, is there something to be learned from preseason? Absolutely there is. I think rookies are one of the biggest headings, because it's that first reveal, and it starts in the rookie minicamp. It goes through OTAs, it goes through camp, and then preseason. And generally, the players that end up being special show that right away, and observers can't help but talk about them. And that's how it's been with Michael Thomas. And Matt, we've talked about Michael Thomas and his fitness for the Marcus Colston role. I know Matt Harmon, we've talked about Michael Thomas and reception perception. But I want to put the proposition to you this way, Matt Waldman. Mouths to feed, too many mouths to feed in New Orleans. You've got Fleener, you've got Snead, you've got Brandon Cooks. Is that a compelling argument to you because Michael Thomas is still going in the 9th, 10th, 11th round. He's not getting the buzz of moving up the board of a Corey Coleman, who's silent with a hamstring right now, or Sterling Shepard. He's not garnering that kind of buzz. I suppose that might be part of the reason. Do you buy that argument? Is that something that gives you hesitation when you think about Michael Thomas for this year, Waldman?
You've got Marvin Jones, you've got Reggie Wayne, you've got Brandon Stokely, you've got
Dallas Clark,
you've got Joseph Adai, you've got Demarius Thomas, you've got Eric Decker, you've got Julius Thomas, right. You've got Wes Welker. Too many mouths to feed. What's the common thing? They've got a quarterback who understands the game better than most coaches do. And guess what? New Orleans also has that. So I don't really worry about that at all. If anything, I'm encouraged by it. And you saw what Michael Thomas is able to do. He's what Michael Crabtree would have been if he went to the Saints. That's what you're looking at here pre-injury. So I definitely like it. And my next question for you, Bloom, is Matt Patricia, the New England Patriots coach.
Yeah.
Does he look like Bluto or Lyle Alzado? Have you kind of looked him up? There looks kind of a mix of both, or maybe if you put some animal skins on him. Yeah, he kind of has that Bluto look. I just kind of noticed that on the sideline recently.
It reminds me of the Robin Williams Popeye. Wasn't that the Robin Williams Popeye movie? Wasn't it a giant bust? Like they put a bunch of money into it? Shelley Duvall's olive oil. Shelley Duvall's olive oil is one of the most natural casting moves ever. There's actually a really good article about Shelley Duvall and The Shining that I just read recently. Anyway, that's a good one though. I think we could do like casting the movie of the NFL and who we could find. I remember who played Bluto in there, but you don't have a Bluto beard. You don't have a Matt Patricia beard, Matt Harmon. You're familiar with Michael Thomas's game. You're familiar with the New Orleans Saints. We're starting to see what happens when you put these two together. How excited are you? And again, that idea of the counter argument being mouths to feed, is that compelling to you?
Well, yeah, I'll start off with that last point. And this is what frustrates me about any fantasy analysis is that everything has to be it's a value proposition. And if Michael Thomas was a 4th or 3rd round pick, yes, that would worry me. They do actually have a receiver who goes in the 2nd, 3rd round, and that kind of worries me from the too many mouths to feed perspective. But because he's so cheap, I don't really I realize that it's going to be probably an unpredictable task week to week. But again, that's why you're sinking a 9th-round pick into him, and it's not that worrisome when he's your wide receiver 4 or 5. So that doesn't really bother me at all. I think that he's a perfect fit for what they need there. They have 2 smaller guys on the outside, or maybe Willie Snead will play the slot a little. Now, I still like Willie Snead a lot too, because I don't think that his role and what he's going to be asked to do is going to intersect very much with Michael Thomas. I think running the routes from the slot, being a middle-of-the-field threat, a red zone guy, I think Fleener and Thomas will cannibalize each other more than Thomas will cannibalize from Snead. But I think there's more than enough room, even from a week-to-week perspective, for what these guys are going to do on this team. I mean, Waldman's right to bring up those offenses with Peyton Manning as kind of a point like this. They have an elite point guard type of quarterback, and they have a ton of weapons that bring a different set of skills each individually to the table. So there can certainly be some week-to-week volatility in this offense, but if that really bothers you, that should only lead you further to the cheaper pieces like Snead and Thomas, maybe away from the more expensive receiving pieces like Cooks and Fleener, because I think this offense is just going to eat. I think it is going to be a really potent unit, and I like Thomas's fit.
And or Drew Brees. I have my quarterback. If you buy spoiler alert, y'all know where I'm going to fall on this. New Orleans has had, I think it was 2012, they had 4 guys with 70 receptions. 2013, they had 4 guys with 100 targets. So it can be just fine. And then, as Waldman was pointing out, he's a good quarterback. Here's one of the ways that it occurred to me is, when was the last time, can we think of any above-average pass catcher? And there haven't been many. When I thought about this question, I realized Drew Brees has been doing this where the best player he played with was Jimmy Graham for about 3 years. And then you had, or 4 years, and then you had Marcus Colston. And I think Marcus Colston, we can look at his numbers and say he was a good player, but a lot of that's Brees. And really, imagine if they'd taken Dwayne Bowe instead of, Robert Meacham, if that had worked out some way for them. Imagine if they had hit on some of these players. I mean, Lance Moore is a nice player, but when was the last time that an above-average pass catcher did not get his for fantasy with Drew Brees? And the reality is there aren't that many players that he's played with that we would say are above-average players, which shows you what he's done.
He's gotten a lot of people paid that probably wouldn't have gotten paid in other cities.
And he's been putting up these numbers with guys like Robert Meacham and Devery Henderson. He's been making not necessarily good fantasy plays out of them, but these are some of the players. Last year was lost Jimmy Graham. You have to break in. He's got Brandon Cooks and who knows what else, and he makes Ben Watson and Willie Snead fantasy worthy. And Willie Snead's a player, but Michael Thomas has a lot to work with. And you give someone like Drew Brees that much to work with, well, it makes sense that they would riff right away and that these things would be happening here.
He's an animal.
Drew
Brees. He's an animal.
He is. And, if you don't know Drew Brees' story about the stuff with his mom actually, he and his mom became estranged whenever he refused to let her be his agent. This is Westlake right over here in Austin. And there's a lot more to the story than that. But Drew Brees definitely has never gotten his due for creating fantasy value in other players. Matt, Waldman, are you giving Terrence West a little bit of respect after tonight? A little bit? Just a little bit?
No.
Oh, come on.
No. I will give this. He has gotten in shape, which is good. And he made a nice cutback run, which was nice. He also made a nice reversal of field, which will probably not hold up in real football once that starts to happen in September. But these are things I've seen from him before. I'm glad he got back into shape, so he's not Titans version West, but he still hasn't proven that he's better than Browns version Terrence West. I want to see a little bit more from him. I don't think there was enough of an exposure for me to feel very comfortable about that. So he's on the right track. I can say that. And I think that if we start to hear that he's challenging Justin Forsett for the starting role, then I'll feel okay. I'll feel a little bit better about that. But I'm not. I just don't believe this guy was ever really a very mature player, and I want to see a little bit more growth from him in the same way that I want to see more from Kristen Michael, even though I'm much more positive about that because of the fact that they're talking about him contending for the starting job.
You anticipate where I'm going with this, but Harmon, you had a reaction there. So are you going to give us more of the pro Terrence West take here?
Yeah, I will, because I grew up under you guys essentially from from the football perspective, and one of the constant things I always heard from you guys on this show, and I've really brought that to NFL, I think, is that the perspective of the drum beat, and I think we're consistently seeing that with Terrence West. We saw him get buzz in minicamp for losing weight and getting praise from the coaches. Then he brings it to training camp, and I think when you see every beat writer kind of in lockstep about a guy, not just one rogue beat writer suggesting that a veteran back could start over David Johnson or something silly like that. When you see a consistent message about this guy playing well in training camp, and then he comes out and he runs pretty well in the preseason, I think that is a steady message that we should be paying attention to. And I think that they have a lot of talented running backs. But the most expensive one does also happen to be the oldest one, and you could see that be a position where if Baltimore does continue to see good things from West in practice and in the preseason games, and also if they like Buck Allen as a receiver, and of course I think we all appreciate the talent of Kenneth Dixon, maybe perhaps they move on from the veteran back and decide to not start Justin Forsett or maybe get him off the team altogether just to get a little money off the books. But I like paying attention to these guys. I like to be overly optimistic because the notion seems to be, and I'm not talking about anybody in this panel in particular, but the notion seems to be in the fantasy community when these like off-the-radar stories pops up, to completely just write it off right away, which I think is foolish. And I'm not like I said, nobody here is doing that, but that does tend to happen. So I like what I've seen so far from West. I was more of a fan of him coming out of school than I think Waldman was, but I like what we're seeing, and I think he is he's at least taking this seriously. He's in his hometown. This is like the dream of his life, and I don't know. I buy into that. Yeah, I buy into that.
Sure, and I buy into narratives too, and narrative does have a place in fantasy football. So we want to know a why here, and the why is that he's back home. He went to Towson. He's back in the Baltimore area, and he's got a chance to impress. And I agree with what you're saying that we have to be open to change, and we have to be open to the idea of just smacking us in the face, like right there, like come on. If every beat writer is saying this, you have to at least investigate. And I think that was the bottom line. What Waldman's saying is it's got his attention to an extent, but he's going to investigate. Not sold yet, making this more murky. But I want to go to Dr. Gene here, because Dr. Gene is the voice of reason always. And Matt brought up Kristen Michael, okay? And Kristen Michael, we all know the history of Kristen Michael. And look, some of the Kristen Michael thing is, I love the way he runs. With at least going back to A&M, just so much energy, almost like he's jittery, but with so much physical talent behind that way that he runs hot. And they even said in some of the recent comments about him that it's never been about his physical talent. It's never been about how he runs the ball. It's earning trust. And there's some talk about him having an awakening. The career near-death experience. He said that after he was released from Washington, he thought, well, geez, that's it. And I think the idea of football being taken away from these guys who've had it for most of their lives can cause, if they do get that second chance, that real chance after they think they're at the end of the line, it can cause a switch to flip. Am I too optimistic about human beings here, Gene? When you're given this kind of narrative served up, you're going to be very level-headed about this. This Kristen Michael stuff, are you open to these kinds of stories entering into our fantasy analysis?
Yeah, I guess I'm open to it. I don't know what any of them mean. I feel like we know those things after the fact. I don't know if we know those things as they're ongoing. I always feel like there's sort of a hindsight thing where, yeah, this is what I went through, this is how I recovered from it. And I would imagine there's some stories where, guys go through similar things, make similar efforts, and don't recover from it anyway. So I think it's something to be aware of. There's definitely room for Michael to do that in Seattle, where Pete Carroll seems to bring that out of players over time anyway. So there's something to look at there. I don't know how much to read into it necessarily. Other than I'm with you. I'm happy to buy into a narrative now and then.
Yeah, here's another narrative, Matt Waldman. Andrew Luck is looking kind of at training camp. Yeah, it's just training camp, but He's coming back from some injuries. He's coming back from a rough year. And I think you and I have talked about before the idea of quarterbacks and imprinting, the idea of quarterbacks playing a lot early in their career when they're not quite ready, and some of the habits they can develop, some of the ways, even things that work, can eventually be to their detriment. And we've talked about Andrew Luck. I think the metaphor I used was the soldier dropped in behind enemy lines, and they say, shoot your way out. And it was fun to watch for a while, and then it wasn't so much fun to watch. And you
Yeah.
can see, is there a chance that Luck, that there's been a turning point in his career? Should we be a bit wary of what we saw last year from Luck? Not injured Luck, but before the injury. It is something that we see to his career start to his development stalling out a bit. Some of the blood on Ryan Grigson's hands. But regardless, when we analyze this offense, we have a tremendous quarterback, like you talked about with Breeze and Manning. And we were thinking of Luck as getting to that level for fantasy, elevating everyone around him. Where are we at now?
Well, I've written about this in June. He's overrated at this stage. Doesn't mean that he won't become a great quarterback. It won't mean that he won't play to his ADP at this stage and finally come around. But he's taken a lot of punishment. When you take a lot of punishment as a quarterback, your skills deteriorate. Your mental processes deteriorate. That just happens to you. It happens to boxers when they get hit over and over and over again. Even though they may be really good fighters, after about 8 rounds of getting pummeled over and over again, not having an answer, they start to behave erratically in terms of what their game plan is. And I think that you're starting to see that. It's about the 5th or 6th round for Mr. Andrew Luck in an offensive line that's giving up more punishment. If you look at NFL.com stats compared to ESPN stats, he's given up more they've been giving up more punishment to their quarterback than anybody since 2012. And I would say that that's affecting Andrew Luck. I don't think there's any issue with that. And I do want to make a point about beat writers a little bit, about lockstep beat writers, because there's something that just kind of I've wanted to say for a little while here, and I don't want to be overly critical of beat writers because there are fantastic beat writers. The guys who are often on the beat writer tour that are on the Audible are fantastic guys who have been vetted by Cecil and Sigmund as quality guys. But if you go to the Combine, or you go to the Senior Bowl, or you go to any NFL event, and you realize the amount of media that has proliferated in football these days, there are a lot of guys who don't know what they're doing. There are a lot of guys who probably know that a football has 2 ends on it and is kind of curved and has some laces. And there are folks who I think that tend to talk to other beat writers to get what those guys had were takes. And you're not getting as much original content as you were before. So I don't, as a fantasy owner and as someone who does analysis, when I see that there are beat writers in lockstep, I don't really care about that. I only care about the 1 or 2 guys who are covering that team who have a real reputation for the type of proven work that they do. And I think that that's important because there are some guys who don't know the difference between the fact that maybe Terrence West has always shown that he can cut, has always shown that he's had burst, but hasn't always been very assignment savvy with some of the plays that he needs to make, or that he tries to bounce things and take really risky plays, make really risky choices in situations where he needs to be more conservative. So that's something I just wanted to kind of bring up because I think it's a good point. That's why I'm saying I like the steady drum beat. He plays the bass drum well. He just needs to learn the ride cymbal, and he hasn't shown that yet. So once he hits that ride cymbal, I'll be a little bit better.
I'm going to be doing a hi-hat, actually, but, bang, gang, gang, gang. No, and Jamison Hensley, who I would say of all of our Baltimore beat writers, the most trusted, and we try to always say this, Mike Reese, the most trusted, Kevin Acee down in San Diego. We try on the Audible to let you know the guys, Matt Mayoko with San Francisco.
John McClain, the Texans.
John McClain, yeah, absolutely. Danny, I love what, he's not with Seattle anymore. We loved what Danny Kelly, Mike Sando when he was with Seattle. But Seattle's produced some great beat writers. So we try to give you that hint.
John Clayton.
Yeah, who was one of the ones talking about Kristen Michael this week. Let's go back over to Harmon. And if you want to say anything about Andrew Luck, go ahead, Harmon. But I want to ask you about Detroit wide receivers. I did an article this week, right team and position but wrong player. The idea being that you can break fantasy football sometimes down to these atomic positions. Which Arizona wide receiver should I take? And you can look at 2 players at the same position, same team. You can look at their ADP and say, you shouldn't be taking Matt Forte. You should be taking Bilal Powell. And maybe sometimes the answer is both. I think you could, going back to Andrew Luck, I think both Hilton and Moncrief could be values at ADP if Andrew Luck is right. But I want to ask you about these Detroit receivers because we're hearing more about Marvin Jones. I know he's gotten the reception perception treatment. Golden Tate has. I mean, you may have some things to say about Anquan Bolden here. Where are you at as far as your draft strategy now approaching the Detroit wide receivers?
Yeah, I'll start with Bolden, just because it'll be the most brief. He's still essentially the player that I think we've always known him to be. He has high success rate versus zone coverage, maybe not as much against man coverage anymore, but one of the best contested catch scores in the reception perception history, as I think we would all pretty much expect. And I think he can play a role for this team, especially down in the red zone. I think he'll be important. If he takes some snaps from Golden Tate in the slot, that's a pretty big damage to Golden Tate's value, in my opinion. So if I'm still seeing Bolden around in the 18th, 20th round of NFL 10s, and I will certainly take him there because I think he's a threat to score 5 to 7 touchdowns this year just because of his red zone ability alone. But in terms of the top two guys, I mean, I'm completely with you, and I've been there for months that the ADP difference between Tate and Jones it doesn't make any sense based on, again, what beat writers have been saying, that the two aren't that far apart. This week there was, the report that Jones is looking like the number one where Tate's kind of struggling in camp. And I think this is a situation, again, where we just have to really think deeper on it. Yeah, we've seen Tate have big fantasy seasons and especially big fantasy weeks when Johnson's been out, but they need a player like Jones to open up the offense. And I think the thing that's most interesting about him from a reception perception standpoint is he's really successful at winning the ball in traffic, the highest contested catch conversion rate score in the series history at 90%. So he'll be a downfield threat because of that. Also, his best success rates are on short to intermediate routes, and that's something that the offense really emphasized in the second half of the year. So I love Marvin Jones, and if he outscores Golden Tate this year, it wouldn't shock me at all because I think he just offers more from an individual standpoint that the team needs right now. And while Tate is certainly an important player for them, and I think he will have Stafford's eye a lot, and perhaps he could lead the team in catches and targets, I think Jones is the more valuable player right now because that ADP gap just won't correct itself, man, and I don't know why.
Well, Evan Silva, and we love Evan Silva and love his work, but Evan Silva has come out really big. I saw after I had Evan Silva on my show, and he talked about Golden Tate, I started seeing him go up a half round around in the MFL 10s I was doing. Maybe we'll see some rise from Marvin Jones here. Really quick, just off the top of your head, and this is something we can come back to. Any distinction, Golden Tate as an outside receiver, Golden Tate versus a slot receiver in reception perception, or anything jumps to mind right away, Matt Harmon?
Well, I don't think he's a consistent good separator, and that kind of worries me from an outside perspective because, he makes his living off being tough in traffic and as a guy that works well after the catch, and I think that really just lends itself to being a slot receiver. And I love Golden Tate. He's one of my favorite receivers in the league, but I think moving out of the slot and to the outside a little more would be a bit of a damper to that fantasy value that he's supposed to have.
All right, I've got to come back to one where I'm actually making a change in my rankings. I've been formatting my rankings the last couple of days. I'm going to do a top 200 PPR in the next couple of days here. But Waldman, one of the changes I've made, and again, these are all of the trusted people up in Minnesota, all saying it's slow going at first for Laquan Treadwell. And it's actually Stephon Diggs who has been far and away the best receiver. I had Laquan Treadwell up there with Shepard, with Michael Thomas, with Corey Coleman as a potential instant hit. But with the margin of error, very little margin of error in the Minnesota pass offense, if Stephon Diggs is that impressive now, and Treadwell will have to overcome Charles Johnson first, and then if Diggs is playing well, you have more of a 1 and a 1A. Even if Treadwell gets featured in the red zone, he seems like the kind of player that you're taking and waiting on, and then you wonder what the reward you're waiting on is in the Minnesota offense. I've moved him down a couple of tiers. I've moved him down from that 6th, 7th, 8th round range to more the 10th, 11th round range. Am I reacting because in a lot of ways you opened my eyes to some of the things about Treadwell that got me really excited, and I'm still really excited from a dynasty perspective. From a redraft perspective, I feel like it's a reality check time right now, but it's still early. So are you adjusting your thoughts on Treadwell for this year right now?
Not yet, because I've been listening to Arif Hassan, who I think does really good work And he's talked about that it's just not quite integrating together, but he shows just about everything you want to see from one rep to the next. It's just not all together at times. But you also see him working extra hard after practices. And people have been saying in the past 3 to 4 days that things are starting to come together a little bit more. I've seen some plays that I felt really good about that, to me, Diggs is a value. Diggs is a similar value as Marvin Jones is a value. So if anything, this is a case where instead of me, oftentimes when I look at like players that people say, we hope to get Theo Riddick more touches. We hope to get Charles Sims more touches. I always say to people, that's great. Bump those guys up. Don't move the top guy down, But when I start to see offensive line protecting Teddy Bridgewater having the highest quarterback rating in the 2-minute drill of anybody in the league last year. Teddy Bridgewater, when you adjust his production minus the number of pressures that he faced more than anybody in the league, was a top 12 quarterback in terms of production with a receiving core that was the best player was a rookie and Mike Wallace. I look at all that and I go, you got to move Stephon Diggs up. I'm not moving Laquan Treadwell down. I'm keeping him where he is, because I think a guy who's working at where he's at and what he's shown so far to me is worth in the range that I'm seeing him at, which is what, 7th, 8th round in that range. Mm-hmm. I feel good about that upside, more so than Kevin White. Kevin White hasn't shown me anything at this stage other than he caught a screen pass today for 3 yards. So when I look at Treadwell, I think it's worth considering to move him down if he continues to be up and down or not completely consistent in camp. But at this stage, from what I've seen with him and how they want to try and feature him, which to me, again, is probably shorter passes, probably things where he may not run the whole route tree and get targeted on the whole route tree like Diggs will. But Diggs, you got to understand that narrative and that steady drumbeat has been he and Bridgewater worked together in the offseason, and they have been on point on deep passes. And that's something where Bridgewater has always struggled, and they're talking about how his deep game has improved, and that's been a consensus steady thing that people have talked about with him. So to me, that's the guy you move up, and I wouldn't move Treadwell down just yet. I would probably move him down if maybe in a week and a half that we're starting to see that issue. But again, it depends on when you're drafting. If you're drafting next weekend, the more prudent approach is your argument, Bloom, that maybe you move him down a little bit more.
Winding up here, Matt Harmon, Mr. Wide Receiver, Mr. Reception Perception. Are you on the Tyrell Williams bandwagon with me? Has he caught your attention? Are you open to this idea? Stevie Styles, we love you, man, out for the year with a meniscus injury. What about Tyrell Williams, Matt?
Well, first I just saw on my timeline Malcolm Mitchell suffered a dislocated elbow, could be back in 4 weeks, and that's from Jeff Howe. So that's not bad. That's worse than I initially feared, or better than I initially feared. But I was getting about 300 tweets of sad faces because obviously I just tweeted positivity. But anyways, so in terms of Tyrell Williams, yeah, I mean I think he's an interesting player to monitor. I can't really give you anything perception wise. He obviously has not played enough for that. He's very different than the player that he's theoretically replacing in Stevie Johnson. So I think he's more in that Travis Benjamin role, a guy that is a field stretcher and a big player. But I think it just means more targets for Keenan Allen in that short to intermediate range because that's where Johnson would have played as well. So I'm higher than ever on Allen, but I like Tyrell Williams for sure. I like the potential and the idea of him.
Waldman, did you have anything on Williams for RSP, or are you going to join this party too? Because he's been developing chemistry with Phillip Rivers, learning some tricks, according to onlookers, and I just feel like James Jones is a speed bump at this point for him. You went the other way. Unmute.
Tyrell Williams is a guy that I added last summer, June of 2015, because when you look at his workout numbers, you see a player who has extraordinary quickness for his size. One of the things that I think is one of the most important numbers to look at is in 40 time, but it's the shuttle, and his shuttle times were off the charts good. I mean, like Charles Johnson had those off the good shuttle times. So this is a player that has all the physical skills to be a top-notch pro. It's just about whether or not he's working hard enough and consistently enough to integrate it, and it looks like that's happening. So I'm just sitting here, pretty much on my dynasty leagues, just enjoying the banana and sitting back and waiting for the Tyrell Williams show. Pretty happy about all that.
The Matt Waldman rabbit. Gene, last parting shot from you, Gene. Whose side are we taking, Joey Bosa or the Chargers, or neither of them? Both of you come to your senses and get this done.
How about neither? Both of them come to the senses. I think you could see the argument on both sides. Why in the world are the Chargers pushing for offset language for a player that they loved and are probably never going to cut? But why does Bosa care? For the same reason, and I can see why both sides are trying to stand their ground here. But I thought we were past all this a few years ago with the new CBA. They'll find new ways to fight over draft pick stuff.
Well,
I guess.
In the way that I had read this was that I think someone said that the Chargers are kind of like a family mom and pop type organization, that cash flow is really important, and the idea of paying out the whole bonus by December instead of holding some of it back for next year, they want to have that cash. We're talking about $6 million, and then the offset language was what the Bosa camp said. Well, okay, fine, if you want to hold back part of the bonus because it's customary for top picks to get it, then we want some offset language, and now you've done it. And I want to say that his father, John Bosa, also had a holdout. I might be wrong about that. But anyway, it's silly. And at this point, I think this is one of those things where who knows how long it will go on, because now you're down to losing face. Someone's going to lose face here.
It's going to affect his little brother, who's top recruited Ohio State at defensive end, I believe, as well.
Yeah, and he even invoked the Manning family, like we should have done an Eli Manning or something like that, or like someone from the family said that. So.
Well, his mom said it, but I guess I think somebody pulled it from her Facebook though, so they kind of went.
Oh, well. Anyway, I just think that this is regrettable, but hey, it fits into the Tyrell Williams narrative, right? Because Bosa would have improved the defense, would have made them be able to have maybe some games that were following a little more reasonable script, more high-scoring games. We like that. We don't like to see holdouts. We want to see all these players play. So many more things we could have touched on it because it's preseason. We got Cody Latimer signing everybody with Trevor Siemian. Cecil and I, off the air, had a question like, do we think Mark Sanchez, he's only going to play a quarter, will he throw an interception? And I said 50-50 he'll throw an interception. Cecil said 100% he'll throw an interception. He threw an interception.
He knows his team, man. He knows his team.
He does. Can you feel it? It's beautiful. Beautiful. There's football on TV. There's things to talk about. There's people, smart people, Dr. Gene, Matt Waldman, Matt Harmon. See who he gets the attention of on Twitter next in this episode of Matt Harmon. Stop hating, Matt Harmon. You're not a hater, though. You're a lover, not a fighter. We're all lovers here, lovers of football, lovers of y'all, of everything that you give us as a gracious audience and give us this opportunity. We love to serve. We aim to please because we just want to share in the joy of this game, like that bunny in our banana. That banana is the NFL, and we're all bunnies, and it's a beautiful thing, everybody. So have a great weekend. Have a great preseason. We'll be joining you every Thursday, well, for a while, for a long time, till we get to the end of the season. And, of course, we do that for you because you always stay classy.